Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in Stockholm, indeed, the privileged few. The quasi-sign doctrine is an integrative method, which is concerned with both the lower threshold of semiotics, which is the main biosemiotic interest, as well as the upper threshold, which I will speak more about, and the necessary interrelation of these two thresholds at the bottom and at the top, as well as in this integration, a textual method, an implicit textual method that comes with this integration, and that comes more from the humanities and social sciences side of things, the general semiotic things, as well as the matter of the social commitment of biosemiotics. So the quasi-sign doctrine is concerned with all these things. And it derives from some work I did in my recently defended and published dissertation, which is here. Mostly in the chapter 5, I developed this quasi-sign doctrine. The title of the dissertation is Detotalization and Retroactivity, Black Pyramid Semiotics. And so in the diagram below, this is the main diagram of the quasi-sign doctrine, and you can see that it's mostly Peircean, but it's derived from Thomas Sebeok's derivation of 6 species of signs, with some slight modifications which I have made, as well as these 2 or 4 critical specifications. One which is between the fully fledged signs and the quasi-signs, and then one which is in between 2 types of quasi-signs, which are the proto-sign and the tardo-sign, as I call them. This is my innovation, that one. And this integrative doctrine, based upon this division, proceeds by means of the proposal that the proto-sign is mostly the concern of biosemiotics in the lower threshold, whereas the tardo-sign is mostly a concern of, well, the other branches of semiotics, structural semiology, deconstruction, and ideology critique, and psychoanalysis, to name a few. And thus my presentation is also organized along these 2 lines of integration, if you see my meaning. And so this integrative doctrine would propose basically a new, really general semiotics, but which proceeds on the basis of biosemiotics. It has biosemiotics as its foundation. And so this foundation would hope to address the problem of relativism in the social sciences, as well as in general semiotics and the humanities, by making it possible through a unified vocabulary to ground definite normative claims at the level of culture, and a time in which this crisis of relativism is quite pronounced and serious. And the thing which so these 2 types of quasi-sign are quite different. The proto-signs are these like simple biological signs which have not yet achieved a certain degree of triadicity or a certain degree of deliberation, whereas the quasi-signs, on the other hand, have already achieved this degree of deliberation, but which have sort of, they are post-triadic, if you will. And thus, where the proto-signs are a biosemiotic matter, the tardo-signs are like a problem of ideology, and also a problem of the digital and the virtual, mostly. Although when it's possible the tardo-signs also have actual application at the biological level, but I'll leave that for the next presentation. I'll leave that for Don's presentation, I think. And this is also an attempt to assert the social commitment, the actual social commitment of biosemiotics. Can you turn on the lights? All right, okay, it's fine. So the interdependence of the 2 types of quasi-signs is crucial here. And thus, in order to postulate about the tardo-signs, we need to address the proto-signs. As you know, the proto-signs are a creation of Giorgio Prodi, but also something which is developed later by Sharov and Vehkavaara. And I know that Alexei Sharov will be talking more about the actual origin of the proto-signs in later days. I'm sorry about the blurred camera. I'll try to fix it after my talk is over. So yes. So biosemiotics is not only concerned with actually fully fledged signs or life, that is something which is above the lower threshold, but biosemiotics is also concerned with the sort of what we can call the precursors of semiosis or the preconditions of semiosis. And so biosemiotics is also concerned with thermodynamics, enabling constraints, and self-organization, among other things. And there's a lot of resistance, not only from humanities and social sciences, especially, but also within biosemiotics to say that semiosis is at all a concern of thermodynamics or of physics, or that the language of physics is even relevant to biosemiotics. But I maintain that it is important, even if it is only a discussion of the preconditions, and even if, as we should, we maintain that self-organization and life are indeed qualitatively different. There's a big difference between self-organization, self-organizing systems and semiosis proper. Still, the language of physics and the level of thermodynamics is a big issue and a level of big importance for biosemiotics. And not only that, but our goal should be to persuade the practitioners of general semiotics and social science that these are problems of theirs as well, because self-organizing systems tell us something about life. They tell us something very important, and it's related to enabling constraints. And you can see two of the most well-known systems or trichotomies for describing these levels of emergence. Terrence Deacon calls them emergent dynamics, the way that semiosis at the top emerges from but is not reducible to the precursor levels. Homeodynamics referring to, well, the level of thermodynamics, morphodynamics referring to the level of self-organizing systems, and teleodynamics referring to, well, to life and to semiosis, but including culture all the way up. And we have an alternative trichotomy to the right here from Anton Markos, which is somewhat earlier, coming from biohermeneutics. And so I'll give you my little soundbite. This is a little soundbite which I will give, and this is my pitch to the general semiotics crowd, to the practitioners of ideology, critique, psychoanalysis, deconstruction, or just cultural semiotics generally, about why they should be interested in biosemiotics, why biosemiotics is a problem of theirs as well, and what it is exactly self-organizing systems, for example, tell us about life. And it has to do with constraints and the idea that morphodynamics, as Deacon calls them, are like the bridge between the level of matter and the level of mind, and critical for our understanding this bridge. And so it starts from the idea of constraints. Constraints, as Deacon explains them, are a limitation on the number of possible future states in a transformation. So they have something to do with absence. And in my pitch, I always use the example of the wheel. You know, so a spinning wheel, which Terrence Deacon also uses. And he refers to a quote from Lao Tzu. And the quote, it's from the Tao Te Ching. And the quote is, 30 spokes meet at the hub of the wheel, but the hole at the center of the wheel is what makes the wheel. That is, again, it's about absence. So if you'll follow me, when you roll a wheel, a certain gyroscopic stability emerges. And this emergence is a product of the features of the wheel. But when the wheel stops rolling, all the features are still there, but the gyroscopic stability disappears. Why are we so fascinated by these examples? Why are we so fascinated by self-organizing systems? For those of you who have read Thomas Mann in chapter 3 of Dr. Faustus, why is it that Adrian Leverkuhn, the protagonist, is so fascinated by his grandfather's experiments with the spinning disc with sand on it. And as he touches the disc with the violin bow, creates a vibration and geometric patterns arise. Why are we so fascinated by this? Well, it's because self-organizing systems tell us something about life. But there's a critical difference between life and self-organizing systems. Constraints exist at both levels. Constraints are substrate independent, but there's a critical difference. You can see a difference between these two systems, between Markosch's system and Deacon's system, where Deacon's system, the first level, starts at thermodynamics proper, whereas Markosch's system, level 1, is already sort of at level 2 of Deacon's system. And in between levels 1 and levels 2, he has machines, which is suggestive. But what's the same between the two of them is that there is a definite difference between level 3 and what comes before it. And this is the level of emergence of life. And the question is, what is it exactly that's missing in this account? I'll close my part about self-organizing systems by maintaining that why they're important for biosemiotics and why they're important for bringing a unifying vocabulary to general semiotics is because we can describe the features of self-organizing systems with closure. Whereas the level of teleodynamics and semiosis cannot be described exhaustively or with closure. It is non-algebraic, it is non-formalizable. Thus, we require the account as high up as possible of self-organizing systems at the level of morphodynamics. This is why biosemiotics is critical to the rest of the social sciences and humanities, that is to general semiotics. But nevertheless, there's a difference at the third level. And at this level, we encounter a problem of describability. And we find in the sort of axiomatic descriptions of what just what is the minimal feature of semiosis at the level of teleodynamics. And in the simplest organisms and simplest examples, we find that the explanations, the descriptions, are always a bit cryptic, perhaps self-contradictory. I might even say that they exhibit a certain critical negativity or recapitulate a kind of paradox. So again, we're getting into problems of describability or problems of aesthetics, as Nora might say. And this is where we begin to sense the integration back from the humanities towards biosemiotics, where biosemiotics has something to learn from general semiotics, where the problem of describability is integrated into a textual method, which I will get to in a moment. But as Kalevi writes, the situation of incompatibility is thus the situation of choice. Choice assumes alternative possibilities as real options, which cannot be executed altogether. Otherwise, there would not be a situation of choice or incompatibility. And that's from his text, Semiosis Stems from Logical Incompatibility in Organic Nature. And when it comes to real semiosis above the lower threshold, this is about as close as you can get, apparently, to an actual formal definition. But as I said, this is not a formal definition. All it does is it reproduces a contradiction. Yes. Again, and so there's a textual method that comes with this way of thinking, and there's a way of thinking which precedes biosemiotics, which already addressed this, and which we find in general semiotics, but which is not explicitly acknowledged in biosemiotics. And so not only does this bring us to the problem of describability, but it also brings us to the problem of the upper threshold, that is the problem of the tardo-signs and the problem of ideology. Because incompatibility presents certain very specific dilemmas of describability or non-describability. And these special textual methods are ways of regulating the description such that the language of science does not ossify into an ideology. And this is the only way that semiosis can actually be described, is by reproducing that non-formalizability at the level of the text. This may involve a number of different, more specific strategies, which I will get to. What's really interesting here, and And again, I guess this is part of my soundbite, another one of my soundbites, specifically to the ideology critique crowd, or the people interested in post-structuralism, deconstruction, and psychoanalysis, is that obviously in an ideological sign system or a tardo-sign system, something is missing. Something in that last slide, some incompatibility is now missing from the system, and this is what allows for this unlimited self-replication or full automation, which happens in ideological systems and also at the level of the digital. What makes that possible is that this incompatibility or unpredictability is removed from the system. And thus, the reason why the ideology critics or the deconstructionists need biosemiotics is it's only in biosemiotics where we really approach an exhaustive definition of what is a sign by means of coming up from the bottom through physics through self-organizing systems. It's only in biosemiotics where we get an idea of what goes missing in an ideological or tardo-sign system. And this is very interesting. And I'll make 2 points on this. I'll make 2 claims regarding this point. One is that we're presented with a great opportunity if we pursue a biosemiotics of ideology critique, because of the resurgence of interest in ideology critique and post-structuralism. Most of us in the sciences will characterize it as a problem. And part of the problem of relativism in the human sciences, this new interest in deconstruction and identity politics and so on. But ironically, it's these very people who seem to be coming around to our way of thinking. And I'll give an example on that. And I wonder if any of you can guess who this example comes from. It's from one of the most popular ideology critics of today, maybe even one of the most popular philosophers in the world. And the quote is this, and you might replace the word unconscious with semiosis if you like. And I read, "The unconscious is not some spiritual substance, deep instinct. It's a very fragile virtual entity. It is what some intelligent contemporary evolutionary biologists, like my favorite, Terrence Deacon, call essentials." Anyone know who this is? It's from a video podcast. It's from Slavoj Žižek, of course. Why should we care what Žižek is talking about anyway? We're not interested in Žižek. Well, I mean, it's an opportunity, and this is my first point, is that this is an opportunity to hitch a ride, because Žižek has somehow come around to the conclusion that his whole Hegelian psychoanalytic logic of ideology critique can't be explained without a cognitive account of the causal force of absence. And indirectly, he heard about Deacon, and he's like, well, this seems like it might work. Yes, quite true. He doesn't know much about Deacon or Peirce, though. This is an opportunity to hitch a ride in order to popularize, like in order to disseminate, I should say, biosemiotic ideas. I'm very interested in this project because ideology critique is on the rise. It's a very popular topic, and it's related to identity politics and so on. But my second point is that because this is direction number 2 of integration, where humanities comes to bear upon biosemiotics again, we also in biosemiotics have to consider some of the lessons that, for example, Žižek would give to us regarding the textual demands that ideology critique requires. And that is, those are that the incompatibility or non-identity of semiosis must be reproduced within the text itself. That is, it needs to bear forth certain internal contradictions. And I assert again, with some non-biosemioticians, that there's been a method for this. There's a method for this. It's just that these practitioners don't know that there's a biological precedent, I guess, and that's where our insight comes in. But so I stress that there's a textual demand and a precedent for this textual demand. And I'm going to skip over this slide. I'm going to skip over this slide and proceed to my conclusion. But I'll just say that there's a great deal of precedent with regard to integrating Peirce with what it's dialectics. This is the textual method that I'm talking about, which reproduces the contradiction at the level of the text. And the point of dialectics, I'm skipping ahead here. There are many precedents for this way of thinking and integrating biosemiotics with ideology critique. And I point to some of them there, but I'm moving forward just to say that the point of dialectics is to assert that, and I'll quote, "If nature is absolutized as first or fundamental code, then it decays into ideology even more rapidly than do the more obviously produced and class-bounded ideologies of history." that is, these textual strategies are meant to serve as a corrective at the level of description to prevent the language of, say, biosemiotics from turning into its own ideology. They must modify over time, and dialectics is a means of intelligently integrating human methods, that is qualitative methods, into the description. And this is something we already find in the most popular biosemiotic texts, such as those of Jesper Hoffmeyer and Terrence Deacon, which are already quite eclectic and quite dialectical. It's only that these strategies are not acknowledged for what they are, and the necessity is not stressed in this way. And one last point regarding this and regarding what dialectical humanistic thinking brings to biosemiotics is the social commitment, once again. And this is a social commitment which most biosemioticians remain a bit squeamish about. But I had an email exchange with Aaron Gar of Australia, Aaron Gar, Swinburne University in Australia. And I asked him if I could quote his email, because I think that he summed up the social commitment of biosemiotics very nicely here, where he says that biosemiotics challenges the entire cosmology of geopolitical economics since the 17th century. It challenges the sociobiology of the 1970s, which characterized living organisms as machines for reproducing DNA. And it continues to challenge social Darwinism, which portrays greed as the driving force of society and history. I think this challenge is what Jesper Hoffmeyer understood to be the ultimate goal of biosemiotics. Quasi-sign doctrine embraces all of this. I'll just recap very, very quickly. I'll recap the basis. At the top, we have the quasi-signs. At the bottom, we have the fully fledged signs. The proto-signs are the biologically simple pre-triadic signs. And the tardo-signs are the ideological and or virtual post-triadic signs. Whether there can be simple biological tardo-signs is a matter for future dispute. Don might bring this up in the next presentation. So there's interdependence between the two types of quasi-signs. Thus, human sciences and general semiotics must take an interest in biosemiotics and vice versa. And there are precedents for drawing attention to this interdependence of the types of quasi-signs. I would point to one paper which inspired me the most from the beginning of my master's degree, which was from Kull, which is copy versus translate, meme versus sign. He blows it all open right there. So you should take a look if you never read that one. Also very interested in Yogi Henglin's work on supernormal stimulus and necrotic signs. And Don's going to talk about determinacy and indeterminacy in biosemiotic systems. And again, this is a matter of the quasi-signs. So if I have just 30 seconds. These are my conclusions. Is that the biologically primitive proto-signs are instructive for understanding the more advanced tardo-signs. There are two directions of integration here. And that's firstly from biosemiotics to humanities, and then secondly back from humanities to biosemiotics. Thirdly, and this is the most, probably the best thing that biosemiotics can bring to the whole discussion right now, is indeed an integrative vocabulary that is yet non-reductive, that can ground normative claims in science, which are applicable to the humanities without reducing those problems of social science to physics. And this is towards an actually general semiotics. And this is possible now. It's possible. We can do it. And finally, that this doctrine brings an implicit social commitment that's most relevant, both to the ecological crisis, as well as this digital, or I like even better, the virtual crisis, because it's a kind of play on words. Both it's a crisis of virtuality, as well as the question of whether the crisis is actually real or not. But thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Tyler. 3 minutes for questions. So, any questions or comments? I see.
If I may.
Yes.
Somebody. Okay. So thanks, Tyler. Great presentation. This is more just a question parallel to your topic, not necessarily on the topic. But what can you tell me or tell other semioticians if you were faced or when you were faced with comments that semiotics cannot be so ambitious so as to model all these aspects of reality that you somehow managed to map in this beautiful diagram that you defend in your thesis. So the comment is, how do you deal with that assumption that some people have towards semiotics, that semiotics tries to map everything as this umbrella science?
I mean, I think it is overambitious a bit to presume that semiotics and provide answers in every science. But if we harken back to 60s era notion of what semiotics really does, that it operates as a kind of regulator at the level of texts and imposes a kind of method to intertextuality itself. And in that level of understanding, the only difference between biosemiotics and deconstruction is that the biosemiotics privileges texts that are about biology. And what the semiotic part is to insist that any biosemiotic discussion entertains at least two different theories of biology and exposes contradictions between them. This is semiotics, right? Or this is one way of understanding what semiotics actually is. And I think it works. It solves a lot of problems, but it's not the answer that everyone is looking for because it privileges the text.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, then there is a question in chat by Terry Montier. Thanks, Tyler. What do you think of the idea that there is no actual absolute absence, the only absence from a species-specific perspective? What we say is the empty hole in the wheel is only absence from our point of view, meaning absence is whatever a species cannot perceive, which connects your talk with Nora's absence as a catch-all of what hasn't been learned.
Yes, excellent question. I will only say with regard to this that I very much enjoy Terrence Deacon's formulation about the level of thermodynamics and absence is actually a substance in the sense of like equiprobable distribution in a thermodynamic system. So it really works with firstness in that way. So that, I mean, you know, and maybe at the bottom level there is no absence, but just equiprobable distribution. But I don't know if that answers the question. But I don't know, I see in Deacon's book, what's interesting in Incomplete Nature, he doesn't actually even say that homeodynamics, morphodynamics, and teleodynamics match to firstness, secondness, and thirdness. But it makes perfect sense to me because teleodynamics and semiosis are both, teleodynamics and thirdness are both the only place at which semiosis takes place. And also the notion of firstness matches, and tychism matches very well with the notion of equiprobable distribution, chance and chaos theory in complex systems. But he doesn't even say that. So, I mean, I think that's really interesting. So at that level, the absence is really only an absence of, well, an absence of intention, perhaps, but there's definitely still something. I'm gonna put my link tree in the chat here. I'm putting it right here. And there you can find my dissertation, as well as my YouTube channel and some other materials, which I encourage you to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much, Tyler.